Picture this. It's 1923. A driver has been on the road since sunrise, trying to cross 3 states before dark. There's no highway under his wheels, there's no route number to follow. There's a road that used to be a wagon trail, and right now it's mostly mud. He's already been stuck twice today. A farmer pulled him out the first time for $2. The second time, he dug himself out alone, packing sticks and fence rail under the tires for an hour in the rain. He doesn't know exactly where he is. The map in his lap is a hand-drawn guide that tells him to turn left at a red barn, and he passed 2 red barns an hour ago. Nightfall is coming, and there's no gas station marked for the next 40 miles, no sign telling him he's even going the right direction. In 1923, that wasn't a bad day. That was just driving. Here's the part most people never think about. Cars had already taken over America by the early 1920s. Millions of them, rolling off assembly lines faster than anyone could plan for. But the road connecting one side of the country to the other, the thing that made a coast-to-coast trip possible without a map made of guesswork and luck, didn't exist yet in any real form. So here's the question nobody fully answers. How did anyone actually cross the country before the Interstate Highway System existed? Before route numbers? Before road signs you could trust? Before pavement that lasted longer than the county line? The answer is stranger than you'd expect, and it runs straight through one of the most famous names in American history. A man who lived through this nightmare firsthand, decades before he became the reason it finally got fixed. There are 3 parts to this story. First, why the roads gave drivers almost nothing to navigate by, and why what did exist was never built to last. Second, what it actually felt like to be lost out there, because that's the part that gets left out. And third, the real reason the interstate system exists at all. Not because someone drew it up in an office, because someone survived the alternative first. When the automobile arrived, it inherited a road network built for horses. Most roads outside major cities weren't paved at all. They were dirt, sometimes gravel if a county had the money, and they turned to mud the moment it rained. There was no federal highway system, no unified numbering, nothing connecting one town's road to the next town's road in any planned way. What existed instead were named trails. Private organizations made up of local business owners and auto clubs mapped out routes between cities and gave them names. The Lincoln Highway, opened in 1913, was the first real attempt at a coast-to-coast route, running from Times Square in New York to Lincoln Park in San Francisco. It was marked with red, white, and blue bands painted on telephone poles and fence posts by volunteers. That sounds organized until you realize what it actually meant on the ground. Trails crossed each other constantly, sometimes sharing the same stretch of road under 2 or 3 different names. The painted markers faded, got painted over by a rival trail association, trying to reroute traffic through their own towns, or simply vanished when a farmer replaced his fence. There was no government body making sure any of it was consistent, because there wasn't one yet. And here's the part that turned this from an inconvenience into something that could actually strand you. Outside the cities, most of these roads weren't paved at all. Only a small fraction of America's rural road mileage was surfaced in the early 1920s, and even where it existed, dirt and gravel simply dissolved under rain. A road that was perfectly passable on Tuesday could be an axle-deep mud pit by Wednesday night, and there was no one coming to fix it. Because in most places, road maintenance was still a local part-time job, handled by whichever county could scrape together the funding. So if you wanted to drive across the country in 1923, you had 3 real ways to try to find your way, and every single one of them had a hole in it, big enough to leave you stranded for good. Option 1. Follow the marked trails. This worked until the markers didn't. Paint faded. Trail associations competed with each other for towns and paying sponsors along their route, which meant a trail could get rerouted overnight without warning anyone already relying on the old markers. Get to a fork with no paint on either side, and you were guessing. Option 2. Follow a guidebook. Companies published route books, sometimes called blue books, that gave turn-by-turn directions using landmarks instead of street names, because most rural roads didn't have names or numbers at all. Turn left at the red barn. Continue past the schoolhouse. Cross the creek at the ford. It worked until the barn got repainted, the schoolhouse burned down, or the creek flooded and washed out the ford entirely. The guidebook was only as current as the day it was printed, and the road changed faster than anyone could reprint it. Option 3. Ask the locals and hope somebody was home. Farmers, general store owners, and anyone who lived along these routes became unofficial guides for strangers passing through. Some would point you the right way for free. Others charged a fee to pull your car out of the mud with a team of horses, which, if you think about it, was its own kind of business model built entirely on how bad the roads were. But hospitality wasn't infrastructure. Some stretches ran for miles without a single farmhouse in sight. If nobody was around, you were on your own, with a hand-drawn map, a fading trail marker, and whatever daylight you had left. 3 options, none of them something you could actually count on. Let's put you out there. Late afternoon in rural Iowa, 1922. You've been driving since morning, and a storm that started as light rain 3 hours ago has turned the road ahead into standing water and soft mud. Your front wheels sink to the axle without warning, and the engine stalls out fighting it. There's no telephone booth on this stretch, no farmhouse in sight, and no way to call anyone even if there were. You get out into the mud yourself, packing branches and loose fence rail under the tires, trying to give them something solid to grip. It takes over an hour, in the rain, with the light fading and no guarantee it'll even work. If it doesn't, you wait. Not for a tow truck, for another car to happen to pass by, on a road that might see 3 or 4 vehicles in an entire day. Out here, that could be tomorrow morning. It could be longer. Now a different kind of empty. You're crossing the Nevada desert in the summer of 1924 on a stretch of the Lincoln Highway that runs for hours without a single building. The radiator's been running hot since noon, and you've already stopped twice to let it cool, pouring in water from a canvas bag strapped to the running board, because you knew going in that no gas station was coming to save you out here. The trail marker you were following disappeared somewhere around the last dry lake bed. The heat coming off the salt flats makes it hard to even tell where the road actually is versus where it just looks like the road. If the engine seizes here, at midday in July, there's no shade for miles and no guarantee anyone drives this stretch before dark. That wasn't a rare situation. And here's where this story takes a turn almost nobody expects. Because in the summer of 1919, the United States Army sent a convoy of 81 vehicles from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, not to fight a war, but to find out if it was even possible to move military equipment across the country by road. It took 62 days. Trucks sank axle deep in mud in Wyoming. Bridges collapsed under the weight of the vehicles. In Utah, the convoy crawled through stretches of desert so soft that trucks had to be winched out one at a time, sometimes covering barely 3 miles in an entire day. The convoy averaged under 6 miles an hour for the whole trip. Among the young officers sent along to observe it all was a lieutenant colonel named Dwight D. Eisenhower. He later wrote that the trip convinced him the country desperately needed a better road system, an idea that stayed with him for decades, through a Second World War, where he saw Germany's high-speed Autobahn network firsthand, and all the way to 1956, when President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act into law, creating the Interstate Highway System that exists today. The roads you drive across state lines without a second thought trace back, in a very real way, to a man who once spent 62 days getting stuck in the exact mud that stranded ordinary drivers every single day of the 1920s. But that convoy was one trip on one route. It didn't fix a single mile of road for the thousands of ordinary drivers still relying on faded paint and outdated guidebooks for years afterward. So how did anyone actually keep crossing the country in the meantime? The honest answer isn't a piece of infrastructure at all. It's each other. Drivers on these routes built an informal network out of pure necessity. You told the next driver headed the opposite direction which fork actually led to the highway and which one dead-ended at a farm. You stopped for a stranger stuck in the mud because you knew the next stranded car could easily be you. Farmers who lived along popular routes got used to strangers knocking on their door asking for directions, water, or a place to sleep, and most of them said yes, because turning someone away on a road like that could genuinely be dangerous for the traveler. Auto clubs sprang up specifically to fill this gap. The American Automobile Association, founded in 1902, began publishing detailed route guides and lobbying for better roads, largely because no government body was doing it yet. Local good roads associations organized volunteers, sometimes literally farmers with their own equipment, to grade and smooth stretches of road near their towns without waiting for any county or state funding to arrive. None of it was official. None of it was guaranteed. But it was the only real system there was, and it worked because everyone on that road understood the same thing. The empty stretch ahead of you could strand you exactly the way it had stranded the person who told you which fork to take. By the mid-1920s, the pressure of all this finally forced change. In 1926, the confusing patchwork of privately named trails was replaced by the U.S. numbered highway system, giving roads consistent numbers for the first time, instead of competing trail names. Route 66 was born in that same system, stretching from Chicago to Los Angeles along a single, numbered, mapped road. The Federal Highway Act of 1921 had already started pushing states to build and maintain a connected network of primary roads using federal matching funds. And through the late 1920s and into the 1930s, paving finally began catching up to where cars actually needed to go. Depression-era work programs put thousands of people to work grading, paving, and maintaining roads that had been dirt tracks a decade earlier. But the real transformation didn't arrive until 1956, when the Federal Aid Highway Act created the Interstate System, a fully connected, professionally engineered, coast-to-coast network, championed by the same man who had spent 2 exhausting months in 1919 learning exactly what happens when a country builds cars faster than it builds roads. Today, the interstate system covers more than 46,000 miles, and you can drive from New York to Los Angeles in under 2.5 days without ever losing pavement under your tires. What was once a genuine gamble, a trip you weren't guaranteed to finish, has become something people barely think twice about. The modern highway system didn't start as a plan drawn up in an office. It started as a lesson learned the hard way, by a young officer stuck in Wyoming mud, and it was kept alive for decades before that, by ordinary drivers who understood, long before anyone built them a real road, that the only thing standing between them and being stranded for good was the driver willing to stop and help. But even after the roads got better, one problem remained for years. Where did these early travelers actually sleep along routes that still barely had a town every 100 miles? That's a story that leads to a strange little property in San Luis Obispo, California, and the invention of a word you use constantly without ever thinking about where it came from. We've already covered exactly how truckers found fuel and food before truck stops existed. If you want the next chapter of this story, the one about where travelers slept before the motel was even invented, you'll find it on your screen now.